The Calithra hung like a brittle skeleton in the Eridani drift, a research station orbiting a neutron star whose relentless pulse warped light and time. Its hull was a patchwork of scarred titanium, pocked by micrometeorites, tethered to the void where stars bled into smears of violet and gray. The corridors were a maze of frost-rimed steel, lit by flickering LED strips that buzzed like dying insects, casting jagged shadows that clung to the walls. The air was sharp with the metallic tang of coolant, recycled breath, and a faint, sour trace of fear, the station's decay seeping into every lungful. The walls bore no names, only scratches, tally marks, equations, half-finished notes, etched by the trembling hands of 22 researchers, each mark a silent cry against the void. The Calithra groaned under its own weight, its hum a fragile thread in a darkness that swallowed sound, its frame trembling with every pulse of the star. Beyond the observation domes, scratched and fogged, the neutron star spun, a pale wound in the sky, its radiation a blade that carved through failing shields, setting teeth on edge, hearts racing. Mira Cade, the station's lead physicist, was a woman haunted by failure. At 37, her hands were steady but scarred, frostbite from frozen conduits, burns from failed experiments, knuckles raw from nights spent gripping her bunk's frame to silence her screams. Her black hair, streaked with gray, was pulled tight, her eyes sharp but shadowed, carrying the weight of a disaster 8 years past. A reactor test she'd misjudged, a spark that tore through her lab, killed her partner, Aaron, and left Mira with a limp, a twisted knee that ached in the cold, and a guilt that burned like frost, unrelenting. She spoke in clipped tones, her voice a low hum, trusted by her crew. For her precision, not her warmth, her calculations a wall against the chaos. Nights were a war, Aaron's voice whispering equations in the dark, her face alight with trust before the blast, her laughter fading into the roar of fire, a memory Mira couldn't bury, couldn't escape. By day, she chased the star's secrets, its anomalous pulses, its impossible data, her hands steady on consoles, her mind a fortress against the void within her, the guilt that gnawed. The mess hall was a cramped dome, its viewport framing the stars' warped light, a sickly glow that painted their faces in shades of ash. Joran, the comms tech, sat across from Mira, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on his mug, his youth a reminder of what she'd lost. At 25, his eyes held a restless spark, a hope Mira couldn't trust, a fire she envied but feared would burn out. Lena, the security lead, leaned nearby, her wiry frame tense, her knife resting on the table, its blade nicked from years of habit, its edge catching the star's light. Cass, the biologist, stood by the viewport, her gaze distant, her notebook clutched like a lifeline, her fingers smudged with ink from endless sketches. The crew, physicists with cracked tablets, engineers with oil-stained hands, techs with frayed nerves, murmured in low tones, their voices a hum against the station's drone, a low growl that never stopped, a heartbeat that kept them alive, fragile as it was. Shields holding? Joran asked, his voice light but probing, his fingers pausing, his eyes searching Myra's for something steady. Mira sipped her coffee, its bitterness sharp on her tongue, a mirror of the station's air. For now, she said, her voice clipped, her hands steady despite the ache in her knee, the burn of her scars. Radiation spiking again. Grid needs recalibrating before it fries the relays and leaves us cooking. Lena snorted, her knife twirling in her fingers, a flash of steel in the gloom. This station's a death trap, Cade, she said, her voice low, edged with disdain. Shields, relays, grid, what's it matter? We're rotting out here. Why bother? Myra's eyes flicked to her, steady, unyielding, the weight of her gaze cutting through the gloom. "Because we're not dead yet," she said. Her voice low but firm, a spark that refused to die, a defiance that carried more than her words. A faint laugh rippled through the crew, tired but real, then faded fast, swallowed by the station's hum, by the star's pulse, by the weight of their reality. The Calithra was tasked with studying the neutron star's anomalies, pulses that defied physics, data that broke their models, for a coalition that rarely answered, their signals lost in static, their promises as empty as the void. Supplies were 3 months late, systems failing, air filters clogging with dust that scratched their throats. Rescue was a whisper no one voiced, a dream buried in silence. They were alone, the star's pulse their only constant, its light a reminder of their fragility. Mira pushed her tray aside, the protein paste untouched, its gray mass congealing in the dim light. She stood, her limp dragging, her knee afire that made her jaw tighten. "I'm checking the grid," she said, her voice flat, not waiting for a response. The crew watched her go, their eyes lingering, not with hope, but with the quiet trust that if anyone could keep the Calithra alive another cycle, it was Mira. Her scars a testament to her refusal to break, her guilt a fire that kept her moving. In the sensor bay, the air was colder, sharper, thick with the tang of frost and static, the consoles frost-rimed, their screens flickering with failing data. Myra's headlamp cast a narrow beam, its light catching the ice on the walls, the faint glint of her breath in the air. She knelt by a relay panel, her hands moving with practiced precision, her wrench cold against her scars, its weight grounding her. The station groaned, its frame creaking under the star's gravity, a reminder of how close they danced to oblivion. She worked alone, the hum of the relays a counterpoint to the silence, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest, the weight of Aaron's memory pressing like a blade, her laughter, her trust, her face gone in fire. At 0100 hours, a tremor hit, not a quake, but a ripple, like a note too low to hear, vibrating through Myra's bones, her scars, her soul. She froze, her wrench slipping, clanging against the panel, the sound sharp in the quiet. Console sparked, their screens flickering with spikes, then flatlining, their lights dying in a cascade of failure. The comms wailed through her earpiece, a discordant hum that tore through her skull, then cut off, leaving a silence heavier than the void, thicker than the station's hum. Mira tapped her earpiece, her breath catching, her pulse hammering. "Joran, report," she said, her voice tight, her knee aching as she stood. His voice crackled back, sharp with panic, a tremor cutting through his usual calm. Sensors caught something, close, no signature, no mass. It's not a ship, Mira. It's something else." Mira was already moving, her limp dragging, her boots echoing on steel as she sprinted to the control dome, the hum faltering, LEDs flickering overhead, shadows twisting. The dome was chaos, tech scrambling at fritzing consoles, their hands shaking, engineers cursing, their tools clattering, Cass staring at a dead screen, her face pale, her notebook trembling in her hands. Joran stood at the main console, his fingers trembling, his eyes wide. Lena loomed behind, her knife in hand, its blade glinting, her stance rigid. "Show me," Mira said, her voice a blade, cutting through the noise, steady despite the storm in her chest. Joran pointed to a grainy feed, the only one still working, its image stuttering like a dying pulse. Beyond the star's pale glow, a shimmer hung in the void, a veil of translucent threads, pulsing like veins, weaving through the darkness, alive and wrong. It gave no heat, no Mass, no signature, nothing their sensors could read. Just presence, heavy and alien, warping light like a mirage, its threads shifting. Hypnotic, hungry. What is that? Lena muttered, her voice low, her knife still, her eyes narrow, a predator facing something she couldn't fight. Myra's jaw tightened, her scars burning under her sleeves, her knee afire, a warning she couldn't name. Get sensors up, she said. Forcing her voice steady, her eyes locked on the veil, its threads alive, watching. We need answers. The crew scrambled, their hands shaking, patching wires, rebooting systems, their prayers a whisper, their curses a shield. Mira stayed. By the console, her eyes on the veil, its presence pressing, the station groaning, its hum unsteady, the air thick with something unnameable, something that made her scars burn, her chest ache. Whatever it wasn't here to save them. It was here for something else, something they didn't yet understand, something that felt like a trap. By the next cycle, marked by the neutron star's pulse, a relentless beat that shook the Calithra's frame, that synced with their fear. The crew had wrestled partial sensors back online, their hands raw from frost and frayed wires, their curses echoing in the cold, their eyes red from sleeplessness, from dread. The veil was closer now, its translucent threads weaving tighter, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the star, that matched their breaths, that matched the tremor in their bones. It gave no emissions, no structure, just a shimmer that bent light into hues, opal, sapphire, colors that stung the eyes, that left a faint ache in the skull, a pressure that made the air feel wrong, heavy, alive. The Calithra's scans were useless, spitting static or voids, as if the veil refused to be seen, its existence a defiance of their tools, their minds, their reality. It didn't move, didn't approach, but shifted, a predator circling, its threads weaving patterns, spirals, knots, shapes that hurt to see, that made the heart stutter, the mind reel. Mira led a team to the observation dome, a glass blister scarred by years of radiation, its panes fogged, the star's light warping through it, casting their faces in sickly shades of gray and violet. Joran followed, his tapping fingers silent now, his hands trembling, his eyes wide with a fear he couldn't name. Lena gripped her knife, its blade a steady point in the chaos, her stance rigid, her breath uneven, her eyes darting to shadows. Cass clutched her notebook, her lips moving silently, sketching equations or observations, her hands smudged with ink, her face pale. The crew, physicists, engineers, techs, pressed close, their breath fogging the glass, their whispers a hum of dread, their hands trembling as they peered into the void. The veil pulsed beyond the dome, its threads weaving tighter, curling like veins under skin, catching the star's light and twisting it into colors that weren't meant for human eyes, hues that made Myra's head throb, her scars burn, her knee ache with a fire that grounded her. It's singing, Cass whispered, her voice trembling, her notebook shaking in her hands, her eyes fixed on the veil, searching for something she couldn't name, something that pulled at her soul. No one laughed, no one spoke, the weight of her words settling over them like ash, like frost. The air was heavy, the station's hum faltering, a low groan that vibrated in their chests, unsteady, wrong. Myra's scars burned, her limp aching, Aaron's voice whispering in her mind, equations, trust, then silence, fire, her face gone. Then, a presence touched them, not sound, but feeling, a hum that vibrated in their skulls, soft but relentless, a note that wove through their thoughts, their fears, their pain. Images came, unbidden, a sea of light, endless and warm, stretching into forever, arms open, welcoming, empty but waiting, a choir silent but heard, its song a promise. Of rest, of peace, of an end to the ache that defined them. The hum felt alive, sweet, invasive, leaving a ache in their chests, a pull that made breathing hard, that made their bones hum with longing, with sorrow. Myra's vision blurred, her breath catching, and for a moment, she saw Erin, smiling, her pale hair catching the star's light, her eyes bright with trust, reaching for her, whole, before the fire, before the guilt. The image burned, a promise so vivid it tore at her chest. Erin's laughter echoing, her voice whispering equations, soft and warm. Mira gripped the console, her nails digging into her palms, the pain sharp enough to cut through the haze, grounding her, her scars a tether. The image faded, but the hum lingered, a tide dragging at her soul, whispering promises of rest she didn't trust, couldn't trust. Her knee throbbed, her scars burned, a warning that kept her anchored, Erin's memory a fire she refused to let go. What the hell was that? Lena growled, her knife trembling in her grip, her eyes wild, her voice shaking, a predator caught in something she couldn't fight, couldn't kill. Mira swallowed, her throat raw, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, the ache in her bones. I don't know, she said, her eyes locked on the veil, its threads pulsing, alive, watching, waiting. The crew scattered to their posts, but the Calithra felt different now, smaller, thinner, as if its walls had grown brittle under the veil's gaze, as if the station itself were shrinking, retreating. The hum was wrong, faltering, the LEDs flickering more often, casting shadows that lingered too long, that moved when no one looked. Myra's scars burned, a constant itch she couldn't scratch, a warning she couldn't name, a cold weight settling in her gut. The veil didn't move closer, didn't need to, but its presence pressed harder, seeping into their bones, making the air heavy with something they couldn't name, something that made their chests ache, their thoughts blur. By the night cycle, the visions had grown sharper, more vivid, cutting deeper, like a blade that knew where to strike, where to twist. Joran woke weeping, his bunk shaking, his voice raw as he told Mira he'd seen his sister, Lyra, dead 5 years in a shuttle crash, now standing in a sea of light, her laughter warm, singing a song that promised peace, that he'd be free, that she'd never let him go. She was here, Mira, he rasped, his hands trembling, his eyes glassy, tears streaking his face. She said I'd be whole, that I could let go. Cass, the biologist, reported researchers dreaming of spirals, their minds filled with equations that sang, their voices a choir that knew her name, promising rest she couldn't resist, her sketches trembling with obsession. They wake up empty, she said, her voice low, her hands shaking, her eyes sharp with unease. Not scared, just hollow, like something's been taken. Lena grinned, her lips cracked. Said nothing, but sharpened her knife, her sleeve, her resolve, her eyes red, her hands unsteady, her breath quickening. Others screamed in their sleep, their cries echoing through the corridors, some clawing at their eyes, their temples, seeing loved ones, lost. Worlds, a piece that burned, that drew blood, their nails leaving blood on their skin. Mira stayed awake, refusing sleep, her hands trembling as she sketched the veil's patterns on a cracked tablet, her fingers smudging the screen, her movements frantic, the spirals curling like veins, hypnotic, wrong, alive. Her didn't trust the hum's warmth, the promise of rest, the peace it offered, a peace that felt too clean, too sharp, like a blade disguised as a gift. She worked alone in the sensor bay. Alone, recalibrating sensor arrays, the air sharp with frost, the consoles icing, her fingers over, her headlamp flickering, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. The hum pressed deeper, Erin's face flickering, her laughter, her eyes, her trust, gone in fire, a lie. Her scars burned, her knee ached, grounding her, a tether to the present, to reality. The station groaned, its hum faltering, the veils. Presence a weight that made it feel, like the Caliph was drowning, its crew with it. Joran found her at 0300, his face gaunt, pale, his eyes hollow, his tapping gone, his breath uneven, a man caught in a tide. It's not just a thing, Mira, he said, his voice raw, breaking, a confession. It sees us. It's alive. She didn't look up, her hands buried deep in wiring, her fingers bleeding, the wrench cold against her pain scars of, her voice a clip. Steady despite the tremor in her chest, the ache in her knee. Maybe, she said, her focus on the array wiring, the hum, on anything but. The pull in her mind, Erin's face, her eyes, Erin's eyes. It showed my sister again, Erin, he said, his voice cracking, his words spilling out, raw a desperate plea, raw and desperate. Lyra. Standing there, singing, smiling, saying I'd be free, that I could be whole. Her don't again. You see her, Mira? Don't you see Erin? Her. Myra's hands stilled, the wrench trembling, Erin's burning eyes, her equations, her trust, her laughter, gone, burned, a wound that wouldn't heal, a fire that kept her alive. She shook her head, forcing her hands to move again, the wrench grinding against the bolt, her. The pain scars of burning, her anchoring knee her aching. Erin's, doesn't matter what I see, she said, her voice low, hollow, but steady. A truth she told herself, a lie to keep fighting. Joran lingered, his breath uneven, his eyes glassy, searching for Myra's eyes, for something she couldn't give, something he needed. He then left, his footsteps fading into the darkness, the hum, leaving the Mira silence alone, with the Erin's console, memory. With the Erin's ghost, with ghosts the hum that wouldn't let go, the song that sang of peace, of rest. On the fourth day, the veil spoke, not with words, but with intent, a chord that wove a through chord that minds wove of through. The Calithra's crews, minds, sliding clear into and their cold, thoughts a hum, clear a and knife cold, sharp it and was piercing. The choir, a collective of essences older than the stars, a weave of light and thought, a song bound in silent harmony, their minds a tapestry stretching across eons, across time itself. Their offer was simple, delivered with a clarity that chilled the blood, that made their bones ache, join us. Become part of song, they're the endless Calithra light, it's a cruise would minds dissolve. Not woven die, into but and become eternal a note in our choir, silent, there a thought's chorus preserved of forever, peace of that promise. Of harmony, where no pain lingered, no guilt lingered, no loneliness gnawed. The crew gathered in the control dome, their faces gaunt, pressed close, in the cramped space of, the dome, the air thick with frost. With the tang of sweat, of fear, of burnt wiring from sparking consoles. The station's hum was gone, replaced by a low groan, a creak. That echoed in their bones, the LEDs flickering overhead, casting shadows that danced like ghosts, that lingered too long. Joran stood by a console, his hands still trembling, his eyes wet, wide, his face a plea for peace. My sister, Lyra, sang again, he said, his voice trembling, carrying over the murmurs, the groan of the station, a cry of hope. She was happy, Joran. She spoke to me, her voice clear. As real as this moment. She said, I'd never be alone free, that I'd be whole, that I could let go of this station, this pain, this endless fight. It's not death, it's more, something more. Lena slammed her knife into the console table, the blade quivering, the impact rattling the fritzing screen, her face twisted with rage. Her eyes wild with a fire that burned hotter than fear. "More," she roared, her voice echoing off the steel walls, cutting through the murmurs, silencing the dome room. "They want our minds, our bodies, our damn souls. For what? A cage? A trap? You're buying their lies, Joran, and you'll damn us all, you'll drag us into that thing." Cass clutched her notebook, her voice soft, trembling, but steady, cutting through the chaos, cutting through the rising chaos like a thread of reason. "We're not thriving out here, are we?" she said, her eyes scanning the crew, assessing their fear, their fractures, her hands steady despite the tension in her voice. "Radiation's killing us, lungs burning, air filters failing, some of us are coughing blood. Systems are dying, the core's one failure from meltdown. If this is a choice, maybe it's the only one we've got left." The room erupted, voices a storm of desperation, rage, fear, hope, a cacophony that shook the air, that made the dome feel alive. Fragile. Engineers shouted of seas of light, their dreams filled with warmth, with voices that sang of rest, their hands trembling as they spoke of lost loves, of peace they'd never known. Techs argued, their voices raw, some clutching tools like weapons, others staring at the floor, their eyes glassy with visions of surrender, of release. Joran's faction grew, half the crew now drawn to his plea, to the promise of peace, their voices soft but fervent, a hymn to the harmony they craved, their eyes lit with a strange, eerie calm that made Myra's skin crawl, her scars burn, her knee ache. Lena's group rallied, their hands on lasers, knives, tools, their faces set with a grim resolve to die fighting, to burn before they broke, to defy the choir's song. Mira stood at the edge, silent, her hands in her pockets, her scars hidden but burning, raw and angry, the choir's offer a weight that clawed at her chest, that made her breath hitch. No more Aaron's voice in the dark, no more waking to the ache of her absence, the guilt that burned like frost, that defined her, that kept her alive. No more limping through corridors, no more nights haunted by equations. By trust, by fire. The visions promised peace, a sea of light where Aaron waited, smiling, whole, her hand reaching for Myra's, her laughter warm and real. But something felt wrong, a splinter in her mind, sharp and cold, a warning she couldn't ignore. The visions were too perfect, too tailored, like a trap baited with her deepest wounds, a lure designed to hook her guilt, to pull her under. Why did the choir need them? Why not take what they wanted, with their power, their ancient, resonant song? Why this offer, this plea, this promise that felt like a lie? She slipped away to the sensor bay, a cramped chamber of blinking consoles and tangled cables, the air cold and sharp with static, the screens casting a sickly glow, the frost biting her hands. The crew's shouts faded, a distant storm, as she pulled up the logs, her hands moving with a practiced ease, her eyes narrowed against the flickering light, her scars burning, her knee afire. The veil's pulses synced with brainwaves, spiking when Joran wept for Lyra, when Lena's rage flared, when Myra's guilt surged at Aaron's memory, a wave that drowned her thoughts, that pulled at her soul. She saw it, a pattern, cold and clear, their pain amplified, feeding the choir's hum, its song growing stronger with every tear, every scream, every wound, like a hunger, a need. A tech, half-mad, eyes unfocused, stumbled past, muttering, "They eat our grief." Mira froze, the words a blade, cold and sharp, cutting through her fear. Doubt rooted, stubborn. Unyielding, a truth she couldn't shake, a spark in the dark. The choir's hum pulsed, unbidden, pressing into her mind, its song clear, insistent, you are alone. We are enough one. Join choose. Us. Mira returned to the dome, the crew's voices a storm now, a cacophony threatening to break, to tear the Calithra apart. Joran's faction had grown, their numbers swelling, their chants soft but fervent, a hymn to the peace they craved, their eyes glassy with visions of light, of release. Lena stood opposite, a wall of knives, fists, defiance, her group ready to die rather than yield, to burn before they sang. Mira stood between them, torn apart, her hands steady but her chest aching, the weight of duty pressing against the pull of guilt. Erin's memory, the promise of peace. Duty fought to save her crew, to keep the Calithra alive, to patch its wounds, hold the line. Guilt tempted her to let go, to join Erin in the choir's light, to escape the pain that had shaped her, that burned her, that was her. But the pattern, the text words, burned, they eat our grief, a warning, a trap, a hunger she couldn't ignore. She stepped forward, her boots crunching frost, her voice low, steady, cutting through the chaos, her eyes meeting Joran's, searching for the spark she'd seen, the hope she envied. Joran, she said, her voice a blade, what if they're not saving us? What if they're feeding on us? Our pain, our grief? His eyes widened, shock, then fear, his hand trembling, clutching his chest, his voice cracking. You're wrong, Mira. You're scared, you're just scared. Maybe, she said, her scars burning, her knee raw, her eyes steady, Erin's equations burning in her mind. Maybe I am. But I'd rather die scared than lose what makes me. Silence fell, a line drawn in the frost, the crew's eyes on her, their breaths held, the choir's hum pressing, Myra's choice heavy as the void, as Erin's trust, as the fire that took her. Mutiny tore through the Calithra, a spark that split the crew, a fire that could burn the station to ash. Joran's faction had barricaded the comms bay, a narrow chamber of tangled wires and flickering screens, their hands bleeding as they spliced emergency signals, their voices a hymn to the choir, a plea for peace, for salvation, for surrender. Joran stood at the center, his eyes glassy, his voice steady. Chanting, they're waiting for us, they're whole, they're free us, his hands trembling as he worked, his face alight with a dream Mira saw, Erin's face in it. Lena's group massed outside the power bay, their weapons, lasers with cracked grips, knives sharpened to jagged points, crowbars welded from scrap, gleaming, their hands raw, their faces grim, ready to sabotage the core, to burn the station rather than sing. Lena shouted, her voice a blade, we end this now, her knife slashing, her eyes sparking with defiance, with fear, with refusal. Mira moved alone, her choice made in the power bay, where the air was sharp with frozen coolant, the core's hum a dying pulse that matched her own, unsteady but stubborn. The core was a cavern of jagged coils, frost-rimmed, its walls slick with ice, the air heavy with radiation's burn, a faint hiss that made her scars prickle, her skin scream. The core loomed, its casing scarred, pulsing faintly, a dying star held captive, its hum a warning, a weapon. Mira knew its flaws, she'd patched it, cursed it, bled for it. She could overload it, send a pulse through the Calithra, a shockwave to disrupt the choir's core, to break its song, its hold. Or it could shatter them all, reduce the station to ash, a final act in the void. She wasn't driven by duty, not to save her crew, not to keep the Calithra breathing. Not survival, not the faint hope of rescue. It was Defiance, raw, stubborn, Myra's refusal to surrender her guilt, her pain, her humanity. The choir offered peace, a sea of light where Erin waited, whole, smiling, her laughter free of fire. But Mira wanted her scars, her limp, her guilt, the jagged edges that proved Erin's trust, that proved she was still here, still hers. She worked fast, her hands steady, rerouting power, bypassing relays, her fingers bleeding, frost biting, the core's hum roaring, screens flashing, critical failure, core breach imminent. Her headlamp flickered, shadows dying, the air thick, her knee screaming. Sweat and blood mixing, Erin's face burning in her mind. The choir's song surged, sharp, accusing, why resist? You are broken. Join us. Myra's scars burned, her limp faded, her voice raw, I'm me, she rasped, her hands shaking, Erin's laughter fading, fire gone. Erin's vision hit, smiling, whole, reaching, her eyes trust. Tears choked Mira, guilt tearing, but she saw the lie, the too perfect smile, not her. Erin. Not you, she whispered, her voice breaking, slamming the switch, blood smearing, the core screaming, a wail that tore through steel. The pulse hit, a shockwave ripping the Calithra. Consoles fried, screens shattered, sparks raining, lights exploding, darkness falling. Only alarms pulsing red, like blood. The station lurched, pipes bursting, steam scalding, walls buckling, the stars' pulse shaking. Mira staggered, burns crawling her arms, her limp crippling, blood searing her mouth, her knee raw. She leaned against a bulkhead. Steel cold, her body screaming, her mind free. The veil flickered, threads snapping, its song silenced, fading like a dying star. Joran's group collapsed, sobbing, their hymn broken, free. Lena's dropped weapons, clanging, pale, staring into darkness. Cass moved. Bandaging, her voice steady, a lifeline. Mira limped forward, burns alive, air thin, smoke choking, the Calithra dying. They were free, but for how long? Her scars burned, her guilt, her proof. The choir didn't strike back, didn't crush the Calithra with overwhelming force. Its veil shimmered, pulsed once, then faded, dissolving. Into the stars' light, the void swallowing it, stars steady, cold, unmoved. It spoke to Mira, a whisper, ancient, raw, we sought your pain. To sing again. You gave us silence. A vision burned, a sea of light, endless, scarred with a fracture, dark, jagged, Myra's pulse a wound in their song. The choir, numb for eons, craved oblivion human grief to feel, to sing, to wake their soul. Myra's defiance silenced them, a scar eternal, a silence they'd carry. The Calithra was a husk, corridors dark, air thin, frost and blood mixing, the core faltering, a whisper dying. Joran patched cables, his hands steady, his eyes clear, his song gone. Lena cleared debris, her knife sheathed, her rage quiet, survival burning. Cass sketched. Bandaged, her notebook open, her face calm, her mind free. They lived, but rescue was a dream, supplies air thin, gone, systems fading, hope ash fading. Mira stood in the observation dome, glass cold, burn scarred, her limp afire, blood on her lips. Joran found her, his voice soft, his eyes steady. Worth it, Mira? She traced a scar, Erin's equations burning, her trust awound, her guilt afire. We gave them silence, she said, steady, raw. They'll never sing again. Humanity's pain, scarred, stubborn, broke a resonant song. In the void, Mira held Erin's guilt, her proof she was human. Join the journey, stay human, subscribe.